The streets of Detroit were deserted that chilly November night, the wind carrying whispers through alleyways lined with forgotten dreams. Martin Brooks, a 44-year-old construction worker, pulled his tattered jacket tighter against the cold. Beside him trotted a small dog with shaggy fur, his loyal companion, Rusty. "You're lucky you've got that coat, Rusty," Martin muttered, patting the dog's head. "Some of us aren't so prepared for nights like this." Rusty wagged his tail, oblivious to the cold, as they turned down a dimly lit alley. The distant hum of a car was the only sound until Rusty froze, his ears pricked. "What is it, boy?" Martin asked, following the dog's gaze. Rusty barked sharply and darted toward a cluster of dumpsters. Martin jogged after him, his boots crunching on gravel. "Rusty, get back here." But Rusty didn't stop. He scratched at an old cardboard box tucked behind a dumpster, barking frantically. All right, I'm coming," Martin grumbled, bending down to see what had caught the dog's attention. The moment he opened the box, Martin's heart stopped. Inside were 2 newborn babies, swaddled in thin, dirty blankets. Their tiny faces were red and scrunched, their cries barely audible over the wind. "Oh my God," Martin whispered, scooping them up carefully. "Rusty, what have we got here?" The dog whimpered softly, his tail wagging as he nudged one of the babies with his nose. Martin shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around the infants, his hands trembling. "Who would do this?" he muttered, his voice cracking. He grabbed his old flip phone and dialed 911. "Yes, this is an emergency," he said, his voice urgent. "I found 2 babies in an alley. They're alive, but they're freezing." The dispatcher assured him help was on the way. Martin sat on the curb, rocking the tiny bundles in his arms. Rusty lay at his feet, growling softly at the shadows, as if warding off unseen dangers. "You're okay now," Martin whispered, his breath fogging in the cold air. "I've got you. You're safe." The wail of sirens pierced the silence of the night, growing louder as red and blue lights lit up the alley. Rusty barked sharply, standing guard as Martin cradled the 2 infants in his arms. "They're here," Martin whispered, glancing down at the tiny faces. "Hang on, little ones. Help is here." Paramedics rushed toward him, their faces a mix of urgency and disbelief. "Sir, are you the one who called?" a young paramedic asked, crouching beside him. Martin nodded. "Found them in that box," he said, his voice shaking. "They're freezing. You've gotta help them." The paramedics carefully took the babies, wrapping them in warm blankets and checking their vitals. One of them looked at Martin. Her brow furrowed. "It's a miracle they're alive." Rusty whined softly, pawing at Martin's leg as the ambulance doors closed, carrying the babies away. "You're a good boy, Rusty," Martin murmured, scratching the dog's ears. "They wouldn't have made it without you." Martin couldn't go home. Not yet. He flagged down a passing cab and directed it to Mercy Hospital, his hands still trembling. Rusty sat on his lap, his head resting on Martin's chest. At the hospital, Martin was met with the sterile smell of antiseptic and the quiet hum of machines. He approached the front desk hesitantly. "I found 2 babies in an alley," he said. "They were just brought here. I need to know if they're okay." The receptionist made a call, then nodded. "Take a seat, sir. Someone will be with you shortly." Martin sat in the waiting area, Rusty at his feet, his mind racing with questions. Who had abandoned the babies? Why? And how had they survived this long? An hour later, a nurse approached him, her face a mix of exhaustion and relief. "You're the man who found the babies?" "Yes," Martin said, standing quickly. "How are they?" "They're stable now," she said. "It was touch and go for a while, but your quick actions saved their lives. Another few hours, and it might have been too late." Martin exhaled deeply, his shoulders sagging with relief. "Thank God." Rusty barked softly, wagging his tail as if he understood the good news. The nurse smiled faintly. Is this your dog? Looks like he played a big role too. Martin knelt to ruffle Rusty's fur. He found them, he said. He wouldn't let me walk past. Dana Carter, a social worker with years of experience, entered the waiting room, her professional demeanor tempered by a warmth that put Martin at ease. Mr. Brooks? She said, extending a hand. Martin shook it. Call me Martin. Martin, Dana began, thank you for what you did tonight. Those babies owe their lives to you and your dog. I just did what anyone would, Martin said, his voice low. Dana's expression grew serious. Not everyone would stop. And most wouldn't care enough to come to the hospital. You went above and beyond. Martin looked away, his throat tight. What happens to them now? They'll be placed in protective custody, Dana explained. We'll investigate to see if we can locate their parents or guardians. If not, they'll enter the foster system. Martin frowned, his hands clenching into fists. Foster care. They've already been abandoned once. They deserve better than that. Dana hesitated, studying him carefully. Do you think you could be that better for them? The question hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Over the next few days, Martin couldn't stay away. He visited the hospital daily, sitting outside the neonatal unit where the babies lay in incubators. The nurses began to notice the way his voice seemed to calm the infants, the way Rusty wagged his tail whenever they moved or cooed. You've got away with them, one nurse said with a smile. Martin chuckled softly. Maybe they remind me of someone who needed a second chance. Like me. As he sat with Rusty one afternoon, Dana approached him again. Martin, she said, her voice soft, you've been here every day. I've spoken with the agency, and, if you're willing, we can start the process for temporary custody. It's a long road, but... Martin looked up, his chest tightening. But it's possible. Dana nodded. Yes, it's possible. Martin glanced at the tiny faces through the glass. Then down at Rusty. What do you think, boy? He whispered. Rusty barked once, his tail wagging. All right, Martin said, his voice steady. Let's do it. The process to bring the twins home was anything but simple. Martin worked closely with Dana to navigate the paperwork, background checks, and interviews required for temporary custody. Each step felt like a hurdle, but with every completed form and cleared requirement, hope grew stronger. Rusty was a constant source of comfort through it all. The little dog seemed to sense Martin's anxiety, often curling up at his feet as he filled out endless forms late into the night. You're the only reason this all started, Martin muttered one evening, scratching behind Rusty's ears. Guess you're stuck with me and them if this works out. Rusty wagged his tail, his brown eyes full of understanding. The day finally came. Martin arrived at the hospital early, his hands trembling as he waited in the neonatal unit. The nurse brought the twins out, each swaddled in soft blankets, their tiny faces peaceful. They've come a long way, she said, her voice warm. They're healthy and ready to go home. Martin carefully took them into his arms, his heart swelling with an emotion he couldn't name. Rusty barked softly, standing on his hind legs to get a better look at the babies. Meet your new family, Rusty, Martin said, his voice thick with emotion. At home, Martin had transformed his small apartment into a welcoming space for the twins. 2 cribs, a stack of donated baby clothes, and a pile of diapers now filled what had once been a sparse living room. As he fed one baby while rocking the other in a bassinet with his foot, Martin chuckled. This is harder than a double shift on the site. Rusty lay nearby, his head resting on his paws, his eyes flicking between the twins and Martin. When the twins finally fell asleep, Martin collapsed onto the couch, exhausted but content. We did it, boy, he said, looking at Rusty. We brought them home. Rusty wagged his tail, letting out a soft huff as if agreeing. The days that followed were a whirlwind of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Martin often doubted himself, wondering if he could really handle raising 2 babies alone. One particularly rough night, both twins cried relentlessly. Martin tried everything, feeding, rocking, singing, but nothing worked. Rusty trotted into the room, barking softly. He approached the cribs and stood on his hind legs, his nose brushing against the edge. "All right, Rusty," Martin said, his voice weary. "Let's see what you've got." Rusty began licking one twin's hand gently while nuzzling the other. Miraculously, the cries softened, then stopped altogether. Martin laughed, his eyes brimming with tears. "Looks like you've got the magic touch." One evening, as Martin was preparing bottles, there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find Dana standing there, her expression troubled. "We've had a lead on the twins' biological family," she said. Martin's heart sank. "What does that mean?" "It means there's a chance they could be reunited with a relative," Dana explained. "We'll need to investigate further, but it's possible they won't stay with you permanently." Martin felt the air leave his lungs. He glanced at the twins, who were sleeping peacefully, and then at Rusty, who seemed to sense the tension. "I just got them," he said quietly. "I'm not ready to let them go." Dana placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "We're not there yet, Martin. But you need to prepare yourself for the possibility." That night, as Martin sat beside the cribs, Rusty climbed onto his lap, offering silent comfort. "I don't know if I can do this, boy," Martin whispered. "But I'm not giving up without a fight." The days following Dana's visit were a storm of emotions for Martin. Every time he looked at the twins, their tiny faces peaceful in sleep or their soft coos filling the air, he felt a pang of fear. The thought of losing them gnawed at him, but it also steeled his resolve. Rusty stayed close, his presence a calming anchor. The little dog seemed to sense Martin's inner turmoil, often nuzzling the twins as if to say, "We're in this together." One afternoon, Martin received a call from Dana. "We've located a relative," she said. "The twins' aunt, Rebecca, has expressed interest in meeting them." Martin's chest tightened. "When?" "She's coming tomorrow," Dana said. "We'll mediate the visit at your home." The next day, Rebecca arrived. She was a young woman in her late 20s, her face a mix of apprehension and determination. Dana introduced her, and Martin invited her into the modest apartment. Rebecca's eyes softened as she saw the twins, who were lying in their cribs, gurgling happily. "They're beautiful," she said, her voice breaking. "They are," Martin replied, his tone cautious, as Rebecca held one of the babies. Rusty stood close, watching her intently. "I want what's best for them," she said, looking at Martin. "But I'm not sure I can provide what they need. I'm just starting my career, and this is a lot." Martin nodded, his voice steady. "I get it. But they're happy here. They've got a home, and they've got Rusty." Rebecca glanced at the dog, who wagged his tail but didn't move from his post. After the visit, Rebecca sat with Dana, Martin, and Rusty in the living room. "I wanted to meet them," she said, her voice trembling. "But seeing how well they're cared for here, I think this is where they belong." Martin's breath caught. "You mean that?" Rebecca nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes. I just want them to have the best life possible, and I can see they have that with you." Dana placed a hand on Rebecca's shoulder. "This is a brave decision," she said softly. As Rebecca left, Martin stood in the doorway, Rusty at his side. "Thank you," he said quietly. She turned, her smile bittersweet. "Take care of them." With the possibility of losing the twins behind him, Martin threw himself into creating a life filled with love and stability. He worked tirelessly, picking up extra shifts to provide for his growing family while ensuring he was always there for the babies. Rusty became an even bigger part of their routine, his playful antics bringing laughter to the household. One evening, as Martin watched the twins crawl across the floor with Rusty bounding between them, he felt a deep sense of peace. "We're going to be okay," he said aloud, his voice filled with conviction. Late one night, as a storm raged outside, one of the twins developed a high fever. Martin panicked, cradling the baby in his arms as he called the doctor. Rusty barked sharply, pacing the room as if urging Martin to act quickly. "The fever's climbing," the doctor said over the phone. "Bring them in immediately." Martin bundled both twins into the car, Rusty jumping into the backseat without hesitation. Rain pelted the windshield as he sped toward the hospital, his heart pounding. At the emergency room, doctors worked quickly to stabilize the fever. Rusty sat in the waiting area with Martin, his head resting on the man's knee. Hours later, the doctor emerged with a relieved smile. "They'll be fine," she said. "You acted quickly, and that made all the difference." Martin exhaled, his hand on Rusty's head. "We did it, boy," he whispered. The storm passed, and the twins recovered quickly, their tiny faces once again filled with life and joy. Back at home, the sense of relief was palpable. Martin sat on the couch, holding one baby while the other lay on a blanket nearby, reaching for Rusty's wagging tail. "You're the real hero," Martin said, scratching Rusty behind the ears. "I couldn't do this without you." Rusty barked softly, nuzzling the baby on the blanket. Word of Martin's journey spread through the neighborhood. People who had once passed him by without a second glance now stopped to offer help. Neighbors dropped off clothes, toys, and even home-cooked meals, lightening his load. One evening, Reverend Harris from the local church knocked on the door, holding a basket of supplies. "We heard about what you're doing," he said, his voice warm. "It's extraordinary, Martin. You've given these children a chance at life." Martin, unaccustomed to praise, shrugged. "I'm just doing what anyone would." The Reverend smiled knowingly. "Not everyone would. You're a good man, and you've got a good heart." Rusty barked in agreement, prompting a chuckle from the Reverend. "And a good dog, too." As weeks turned into months, the twins grew stronger and more active. Their first smiles, giggles, and attempts at crawling filled the small apartment with joy. One afternoon, Martin watched as one of the twins pulled herself up on the edge of the coffee table. "Look at you," he exclaimed, his voice filled with pride. Rusty barked excitedly, circling the baby and wagging his tail furiously. "You're her cheerleader, huh?" Martin said, laughing. The baby clapped her tiny hands, her laughter filling the room. Late one night, after the twins had fallen asleep, Martin sat on the porch with Rusty, staring at the stars. "I never thought my life would turn out like this," he said, his voice low. "I spent so long just getting by, thinking that was all there was. But now," Rusty rested his head on Martin's knee, his eyes filled with quiet understanding. "They saved me as much as I saved them," Martin continued. "And you're the reason I found them." Rusty barked softly, his tail thumping against the porch. One evening, as Martin prepared dinner, there was a knock at the door. When he opened it, he found Dana standing there, her face serious. "Martin," she began, "we've received an unexpected development. A distant relative has come forward, claiming a connection to the twins." Martin's stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" "It means we'll need to investigate," Dana said carefully. "They have a right to petition for custody, but nothing is certain yet." Martin felt the weight of her words like a punch to the chest. "I thought we were past this." "I know," Dana said gently. "But we'll work through it. You've been an incredible father to them, and that won't go unnoticed." That night, as Martin sat by the cribs, Rusty lay at his feet, offering silent support. "We're not giving up, boy," Martin whispered. "Not now. Not ever." The news of a potential custody battle weighed heavily on Martin. Each moment with the twins felt bittersweet, as though time itself was slipping through his fingers. But instead of giving in to fear, he resolved to fight harder than ever to keep the family he had built. Rusty seemed to sense the tension, staying even closer than usual. Every coo and giggle from the twins was met with a wag of his tail or a gentle nuzzle, as if reminding Martin to hold on to hope. Dana returned a week later with updates. "The relative lives in Florida," she explained. "They've petitioned for custody, but it's clear they haven't been actively involved in the twins' lives. Martin's jaw tightened. "I've been here since day one. They're my kids. I won't let them go." Dana placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "The court will consider everything: your bond with the twins, the stable environment you've provided, and even community support. You have a strong case." Over the following weeks, Martin worked tirelessly to prepare for the hearings. He gathered character references from neighbors, his boss, and even Reverend Harris, all of whom vouched for his commitment and love. As the hearing date approached, the community rallied around Martin. Families who had received Rusty's friendly greetings during walks showed up with casseroles and letters of support. Even the local paper ran a story about his journey, dubbing him the man who saved 2 lives and found his own. "You've touched more lives than you know," Reverend Harris said during a gathering at the church. "And we're here to make sure the court sees that," Rusty barked, wagging his tail as if agreeing. On the day of the hearing, Martin dressed in his best suit, a hand-me-down from his late father, and sat in the courtroom, his heart pounding. The twins, too young to understand, cooed softly in their stroller, while Rusty stayed home with a neighbor. The Florida relative, a distant cousin, presented their case, claiming they had the means to care for the children. But when Martin spoke, his words carried the weight of his love and sacrifices. "I didn't just find these babies," he said, his voice steady. "They found me. They gave me purpose when I thought I had none. They're not just my responsibility, they're my family." Dana presented photos of the twins thriving under Martin's care, along with letters from neighbors and medical staff attesting to his dedication. Weeks later, the judge called a final hearing to deliver the decision. Martin sat in the courtroom, his hands clenched in his lap. Rusty wasn't there, but Martin felt the dog's unwavering presence in his heart. "The court recognizes the efforts and intentions of both parties," the judge began. "However, the children's well-being must remain our priority." The room fell silent as the judge continued. "Given the evidence presented, it is clear that Mr. Brooks has provided a stable, loving environment for the twins. Custody will remain with him." Relief and joy surged through Martin as he let out a shaky breath. Tears filled his eyes as he looked at the twins, who were obviously chewing on their toys. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Back at home, Rusty greeted Martin and the twins with frantic tail wags and happy barks. Martin scooped the dog up, laughing through his tears. "We did it, Rusty. They're ours." Over the following months, life returned to its happy chaos. The twins took their first steps, their laughter filling the small apartment. Rusty, ever the protector, was there for every milestone, his loyalty unwavering. One evening, as Martin sat on the porch with Rusty at his feet and the twins in his lap, he gazed at the stars. "We've come a long way, boy," he said softly. "But this,